the unimaginable. After months of escalating tensions in Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin makes a decision that changes everything. Facing a potential military defeat and internal pressures, he turns to the highest level of escalation, which he has threatened to use more than 50 times so far. So, instead of waiting for the inevitable Western response, Putin decides to strike first. He launches a coordinated nuclear attack against the United States and key NATO allies. What follows is not a long conflict, but the fastest and most destructive war in human history. The time from the first launch to global devastation, less than 2 hours. This is how nuclear war unfolds, minute by minute. 15 minutes before the target time, Putin sits in his underground command center beneath the Kremlin. The war in Ukraine has reached a decisive crossroads. Ukrainian forces, backed by advanced Western weapons, have pushed Russian forces into retreat on multiple fronts. His military advisors present him with what they call limited nuclear options. A single tactical nuclear weapon with a blast yield of no more than 10 kilotons, slightly smaller than the one dropped on Hiroshima, could destroy Ukraine's resistance and threaten NATO into entering negotiations. He has two choices: either deliver a knockout blow by trying to hit Kyiv and the Ukrainian government, leaving the rest of the country scattered without its senior leadership, or the tactical weapon can be used on a smaller target like Kharkiv, Dnipro, or Zaporizhzhia, places Russia has failed to capture over the past 2 years. 1 minute before the designated time, a tactical nuclear weapon detonates near or in Zaporizhzhia, vaporizing an armored Ukrainian brigade and creating a mushroom cloud visible from space. Radiation detectors across Europe register the blast immediately. Assuming the weapon used is a 10-kiloton nuclear bomb, the explosion turns everything within a half-mile radius to ash. Farther out, people within a 1-mile area suffer severe burns as well as exposure to likely lethal radiation. Buildings collapse under massive structural damage, and firefighters and emergency crews go on maximum alert to rescue and treat survivors once the smoke clears. The radius of the lighter damage, so to speak, extends for several miles from ground zero. 1 minute earlier, the city of Zaporizhzhia had around 700,000 residents. The tactical weapon causes tens of thousands of deaths in the blast alone. Those remaining in the city are evacuated. Within minutes, secure communication lines between Kyiv, Washington, London, Paris, and Berlin buzz to confirm the news. Russia has crossed the nuclear threshold. Putin watches the global reaction from his command center. He turns to Defense Minister Andrei Belousov and issues the order that will reshape human civilization. Launch everything. The Russian nuclear command system, known as Dead Hand or Perimeter, is activated. Designed during the Cold War to ensure nuclear retaliation even if Soviet leadership were wiped out, the system begins the launch sequence. Across Russia's vast territory, 400 intercontinental ballistic missiles in underground silos receive encrypted launch codes. Road-mobile Topol-M launchers, hidden in forests and dispersed across 11 time zones, begin final preparations. Russia's fleet of nuclear submarines, each Borei-class submarine carrying 16 Bulava missiles, receives orders to surface and launch. Putin's target list is precise and devastating. In the United States, the Pentagon, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, as well as missile fields in Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota. In the United Kingdom, the main targets are the Faslane Naval Base and government facilities in London. In France, targets include the nuclear submarine base at Brest and the headquarters of the Strategic Forces. In Germany, Ramstein Air Base and various NATO command centers are targeted. Other potential targets include NATO's new base in Romania, as well as U.S. nuclear weapon sites in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy. The goal here is not invasion, but decapitation. Putin wants to eliminate NATO's ability to respond before they fully understand what is happening. At 0 hour, just 60 seconds after Putin gives the order, the first Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles ignite in their silos. The launch is detected almost immediately. The U.S. Space-Based Infrared System, SBIRS, Early warning satellites, positioned 22,000 miles above Earth in geosynchronous orbit, pick up the hot exhaust signatures of the missiles. Within seconds, automated systems at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado receive the alert. The message is simple and terrifying. Russia has launched multiple intercontinental ballistic missiles, and the first phase of their near-orbital flight around Earth has begun. In the second minute after launch, a call reaches President Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Because of the time difference, a midday launch in Russia means it is morning in Washington, D.C. NORAD's commander speaks in a steady but urgent voice. "Mr. President, we have confirmed launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles from multiple sites across Russia. Estimated time to impact on the continental United States is 28 minutes. We assess this to be a coordinated first strike." Trump has the authority to order a nuclear response under the Launch on Warning Doctrine. He does not need Congress's approval. He does not need to consult allies. The presidential emergency satchel, known as the nuclear football, containing America's launch codes, is brought to him immediately. The president must now decide whether to end civilization as we know it, and he has less than 28 minutes to decide. In the fourth minute after the Russian launch, an even more urgent threat appears from beneath the waves. Russia's Borei-class submarines, positioned a few hundred miles off the American coastline, begin launching their Bulava missiles. These submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, need to travel only 1,931 kilometers instead of another 6,000 to 10,000 to reach land. The shorter distance also means the flight time to Washington, D.C. is drastically reduced. At Peterson Space Force Base, the threat assessment is updated in real time. 150 intercontinental ballistic missiles have been launched from Russian silos. 64 submarine-launched ballistic missiles have been launched. Estimated targets include dozens of American cities and military installations and dozens more targets across Europe. The ICBMs headed for Europe will take roughly an additional 10 minutes before they enter their terminal phase and begin deploying their warheads. The submarine-launched missiles are on nearly the same countdown. But wait. Doesn't the United States have a way to try to intercept the missiles before they reach the U.S.? In theory, yes. There is the American Mid-Course Defense System, known as Ground-Based Mid-Course Defense, GMD. Essentially, the GMD system uses a smaller interceptor missile that homes in on its target using a suite of sensors. If GMD interceptors are launched within a few minutes after the ICBMs enter their second phase, the mid-course phase, they will fly their own near-orbital paths to try to intercept them. However, at the speeds and altitudes involved in ballistic flight, no technological capability can truly cope with what is about to happen. The best analogy analysts use to describe ballistic interception is trying to hit a bullet with a bullet, and both bullets are moving at hypersonic speeds. It is made worse by the fact that the GMD system does not have a stellar record. Because of limited testing and realistic training opportunities, there have only been 18 tests of the system since 1999. Of those, the GMD system has managed to intercept and destroy a ballistic missile only 10 times. If we extrapolate that to around 400 missiles Russia will launch at Europe and the United States, that still leaves more than 220 missiles very likely to hit their targets. And even if they miss by tens of miles, the damage they can cause is enormous. Worse still, a nuclear missile usually does not carry just one warhead. It can carry up to 10 warheads. Each warhead can be deployed independently, spreading destruction over a wider area. So, 6 minutes after launch, Trump makes the decision every president hopes never to face. He authorizes an immediate nuclear response. Scenario OPLAN 8010-12. Strategic deterrence and force employment begins unfolding automatically. Within 60 seconds, 400 American Minuteman III missiles in Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming receive their own launch codes. Nuclear submarines prowling the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans prepare to launch 20 Trident II missiles at Russian targets. In the 8th minute, London's emergency warning system for the Prime Minister is activated. The United Kingdom's 4 Vanguard-class submarines maintain continuous nuclear deterrent patrols. One of them, HMS Victorious, is currently submerged in the North Atlantic with 16 armed Trident missiles ready to fire. Launch orders go out simultaneously from London and Paris. France's Force de Frappe, its independent nuclear deterrent, begins launching M51 missiles from submarines in the Atlantic. Within minutes, French land-based missiles on the Plateau d'Albion join the salvo. Europe's nuclear response amounts to an additional 100 warheads targeting Russian military facilities. By the 12th minute after launch, the Russian submarine-launched missiles are only minutes from impact. Ground-based American interceptors fire desperately from Fort Greely, Alaska, at the incoming warheads. The mid-course defense system is activated. Some interceptors find their targets. Most do not. At the 16th minute, the first nuclear weapon in World War III detonates over Washington, D.C. The 800-kiloton warhead, 50 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, explodes 1,500 feet above the White House. The seat of the U.S. government literally vanishes from existence. The blast creates a fireball reaching 2,482 degrees Celsius, instantly vaporizing everything within a half-mile radius. The Pentagon, across the Potomac River, is destroyed seconds later by a second warhead. The destruction is total and immediate. Over the next 15 minutes, Russian warheads explode across America with extraordinary precision. Naval Station Norfolk, home of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet, is wiped out by a 100-kiloton blast. Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, which houses U.S. Strategic Command Headquarters, is obliterated. Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, which contains at least 50 Minuteman missiles, is destroyed before they can launch. In New York, a warhead aimed at the Brooklyn Navy Yard detonates over Lower Manhattan. 8 million people have 30 seconds to comprehend their fate before the shockwave reaches them. The death toll climbs sharply. Early estimates suggest that a large-scale attack on the most densely populated U.S. cities could cause millions of deaths from the blasts and resulting fires. At the same time, Russian missiles reach their European targets. London's financial district disappears as warheads rain down on the British capital. The blast wave flattens everything from Westminster to the Tower of London. In Paris, a missile aimed at the Élysée Palace misses by 3 miles, detonating over Montmartre. The resulting firestorm consumes 30 square miles of the city. The port of Hamburg, NATO's largest logistics hub in Northern Europe, is erased by a warhead fired from a submarine in the Baltic Sea. Europe does not fare much better in trying to save lives. The entire continent lacks a reliable interception system, only a deterrence plan that has clearly failed, and a nuclear arsenal 5 times smaller than Russia's. By the 24th minute, America's Minuteman missiles, launched 18 minutes earlier, begin reaching their targets across Russia. However, because U.S. doctrine prohibits the use of nuclear weapons on purely civilian centers, the targets are strictly strategic. The first impact destroys the Plesetsk Cosmodrome, wiping out Russia's ability to launch reconnaissance satellites. The naval base at Severodvinsk, home to the construction of Russian nuclear submarines, disappears under a 335-kiloton blast. Anything not in a hardened shelter within 3 miles is turned to fragments. But the most destructive American strikes target Russia's nuclear arsenal itself. Road-mobile missile launchers hidden in the forests of Siberia are tracked by satellites and destroyed with precision strikes. Underground silos in the Kola Peninsula and across the Russian heartland are annihilated with maximum accuracy and impunity. By the 35th minute after the Russian launch, the first phase of destruction is complete. And if both Russia and the United States have committed to using all of their nuclear weapons before the other side can destroy them, we are looking at 3,400 nuclear warheads detonated or destroyed across the Northern Hemisphere. Russian missile silos are empty. Putin is likely hiding somewhere in a bunker. American command and control centers are smoking craters. Cities across Europe and the United States are burning, with millions dead and more dying. Then comes the knockout blow. The last French missiles launched from submarines detonate over the Kola Peninsula, wiping out the headquarters of Russia's Northern Fleet. The final British Trident missiles destroy the Pacific Fleet base at Vladivostok. The nuclear exchange is effectively over in less than an hour after the first nuclear weapon is used on Ukraine, but death is only just beginning. By the second hour of strikes, as mushroom clouds rise over dozens of cities, the scale of destruction becomes clear. Casualty estimates for a limited strike focusing on military targets rather than the largest population centers reach about 15 million. Electromagnetic pulses from high-altitude detonations have destroyed electronic systems over vast areas. Modern civilization, dependent on computer networks, GPS, and power grids, begins a slow collapse. But nuclear weapons do not kill only through blast and heat. By the 6th hour after the start of the nuclear war, radiation begins claiming victims among those who survived the initial explosions. Hospitals, damaged or destroyed themselves, cannot cope with hundreds of thousands of radiation casualties. Fires rage uncontrollably across the affected cities. Broken water mains leave firefighters helpless against the flames. Areas close to the blasts emit lethal radiation, preventing coordinated first response operations. More ominously, the mushroom clouds from hundreds of nuclear explosions start mixing into the upper atmosphere, forming a radioactive shroud that begins to spread worldwide. The explosions also loft soot into the air, making breathing in the cities potentially deadly. Princeton's estimates of potential human losses after a few hours reach 34 million, and even that assumes a smaller-scale war. At this point, it is practically safe to say the war is over, but there is no winner. After 3 days, satellite images reveal the full extent of the destruction. Financial markets collapse as investors realize the global economy is in free fall. Supply chains that depended on American and European manufacturing grind to a halt. China closes its borders and begins stockpiling emergency food. India mobilizes its army to prevent refugee flows. South American countries declare neutrality and begin rationing fuel. After 2 weeks, the giant fires that had been consuming the bombed cities begin to die down, but they have already released 150 million tons of smoke and soot into the stratosphere. This black carbon absorbs sunlight and prevents it from reaching Earth's surface. Grain exports from Ukraine and Russia, which used to feed 400 million people worldwide, have stopped. The global food supply, already disrupted by the collapse of transport networks, suffers its first major shock. Global grain reserves, which normally cover about 75 days, begin to run dangerously low. Within 6 months, global surface temperatures have already begun to drop, and the change is noticeable. Agricultural regions in the U.S. Midwest and the European plains see crop failures due to falling temperatures and the sudden reduction in solar radiation. Growing seasons in the Northern Hemisphere shorten by 40 days. Crop yields around the world fall by 60%. Global famine deaths reach 100 million and are rising rapidly. Modern, just-in-time supply chains, designed for efficiency rather than resilience, prove completely inadequate for this crisis. Countries with food reserves impose martial law to prevent riots. International trade effectively stops as states hoard remaining resources for their own populations. 2 years after the war, nuclear winter reaches its peak. Average global temperatures have dropped by 14 degrees Celsius, triggering a mini ice age. Agricultural production has collapsed worldwide. Rice yields in Asia fall by 80%. Wheat production in the remaining suitable regions drops by 90%. Even hardy crops like potatoes fail in the radically changed climate. Total deaths are projected to reach about 5 billion as people starve and the Southern Hemisphere struggles to recover. Nuclear winter gradually fades, taking about a decade for average temperatures and solar radiation levels to return to their pre-war values. But modern industrial civilization has completely collapsed by that point. The complex supply chains that once produced everything from computer chips to pharmaceuticals have vanished. Even then, survivors face a planet where some radioactive regions will remain uninhabitable for centuries, and genetic damage from radiation exposure affects future generations. Biodiversity has collapsed as ecosystems failed during nuclear winter. Of course, this scenario is purely hypothetical, as neither side so far appears suicidal enough to launch an all-out nuclear war. Instead, the thought experiment illustrates the fundamental madness of nuclear war. Unlike conventional wars that can be fought and won or lost, there are no winners in a nuclear war between great powers. If Russia decided to deploy a tactical nuclear weapon on Ukraine, it is far more likely it would do so only to force Ukraine to surrender. That would probably compel NATO to respond with a conventional war. Russia would then withdraw, losing the war in Ukraine and returning the world to the status quo. Only twice so far have nuclear weapons been used to destroy cities in history, yet many more of these weapons still exist. Launch systems are operational. Command structures remain in place. All that prevents this scenario is the continued rationality of a handful of world leaders and the absence of a single catastrophic miscalculation. The nuclear arsenals built to keep the peace can, in 35 minutes, end human civilization. The only way to prevent this is for everyone to agree to dismantle these weapons and take them out of service completely. But as long as there is doubt that even one bad actor exists, the others cannot take the risk.